Hey, it's Mattea. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen today. If you've been enjoying Bookends, why don't you give us a follow on your favorite podcast app? This will ultimately help us make more episodes and also connect you with more of your favorite authors. And don't forget to leave a review. It helps us get the word out to others who might enjoy the show. I hope you liked today's episode, and thanks again so much for listening. Hi, I'm Mattea Roach. Welcome to Bookends. The name Dorian McNamara may not ring a bell for you yet, but his story, You, Streetcar at Night, is the winner of the 2025 CBC Short Story Prize. If you've spent any time in downtown Toronto, you will know the city's trademark rumbling red streetcars. There's those new, long, languid streetcars. There's those old, classic trolley-style streetcars. People have a lot of thoughts, feelings, sensations, emotions associated with them. Dorian has had lots of experience riding the streetcar, which is why he chose it as a backdrop for this story of the before and after in the life of a young transgender person. His protagonist reflects on his first relationship as he and his fellow commuters roll through the Toronto streets at night. Author Dorian McNamara is originally from Toronto and is now based in Halifax, but today he joined me from Tokyo. Hi, Dorian. Thanks for making time.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So you were announced recently as the winner of the CBC Short Story Prize. Congratulations. Everyone can go read the story on cbcbooks.ca. I want to ask how it feels to be the winner.
It feels very surreal still. I don't know if it'll ever start to feel real. I kind of hope it doesn't. It's such a tremendous honor. And as a young writer, I cannot begin to express how incredible it feels to have my work be recognized and to be in that community of so many great, incredible authors.
So we know that this story takes place on a streetcar, and it sort of follows this journey of the protagonist getting on the streetcar, thinking about the past, and then eventually kind of coming out of this reverie. But can you tell us what the story is about? What sort of reminiscences are provoked by this streetcar journey?
Yeah, for sure. I sort of treated the streetcar as a locked box almost, because when you're really in a streetcar, all you're doing is you're sitting and the entire world is passing you by, and it's a very strange experience. And it leaves you with a lot of time to think. So I decided to create that sort of stagnant space that was just full of memories weaving in and out as a way of exploring that dichotomy between stillness and motion.
It's true, yeah. Being on I think any form of transportation where you're not the driver, but especially a streetcar or a train, does provide this space for contemplation. You're coming into contact with all sorts of people, but not necessarily conversing with them or directly relating. What is your relationship with Toronto's streetcars? Because I know you grew up here, and it sounds like you spent a lot of time yourself as a younger person sitting on the streetcar and having your own periods of quiet contemplation.
Yeah, public transport was how I went to school. So it's something that as a young person, I was very intimately familiar with. And I really like the streetcar. I like public transport in particular. I find it so interesting to watch all of the different people going about their day and how different my experience is from theirs and how little I really know of them and how little I can imagine. I think that streetcars are like very nostalgic for me. There's a lot of memories of me like falling asleep on like the 501, which is maybe not the best experience for a young person.
Can you describe the route of the 501? What sorts of scenery were you seeing? What sorts of people were you encountering there?
Yeah, for sure. I took it from like the east end of Toronto to just about the center most often. So for me, it would be like passing through the beaches and these quieter residential areas, and then you'd get to these really loud, really busy intersections. And as, you got closer to the city core, things would get louder and like the route would change or it would suddenly stop sometimes. And you would never exactly know what was going on or who was on the train with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, lately the 501, the Queen Streetcar, has been really wonky. A lot of bus replacements, a lot of rerouting due to the construction of the new subway line downtown. So it's a route I've been avoiding using, to be totally honest. I want to know, you talk about having used the streetcar to go to school in the morning, leaving it in the evening, perhaps. What is it about riding public transportation at night that made you want to set your story during that time?
There's something sort of magical about being so tired and like you're in this position where you're being still, you've been busy all day, let's say, and you're sitting down and there are people around you, sure, but for a moment you don't know any of them. And so you can sort of pretend that they don't exist and they're pretending you don't exist. So in that way, you're surrounded by people and all, like very alone. And I think that at night, that like aloneness is really amplified and you feel it much more.
Mm. We've been talking a lot about the specific geography of Toronto, but I know you've moved to Halifax to go to college and now are living there post-graduation. Famously a city that got rid of its streetcars many decades ago, which I find very sad. We've kind of done reverse journeys where I grew up in Halifax and moved to Toronto and have lived my whole adult life here. And I'm curious, from your perspective as somebody who went the opposite way, as someone who grew up in Toronto and now lives in Halifax, is there anything that you miss about Toronto or anything that you enjoy about Halifax as somebody who moved to there that maybe I don't notice as someone who grew up around that environment?
I think for me, what I like the most about Halifax is the ocean, which, I mean, it's everywhere. You point yourself in one direction and keep walking, you'll find a beach soon enough. I love being near the water. I think that it's a great source of inspiration and for creativity for me. But I do definitely miss Toronto, not just because my family's there, but I also miss sometimes how loud it is and how bright it is and how it's so busy all the time. It feels like it's its own living body, which I think is incredible.
Mm. I want to talk a bit, we've been talking about the sort of geography of this story, but there's a whole other element to it where this is a story that's about transition, that's about a young queer person reflecting back on a time in their life when they were figuring out that they were trans, essentially realizing, you know what, I think I'm a boy, actually, and what is this going to do to my relationship that I'm in? What is this going to do to my relationship with my family and friends and people around me? There's this one sentence in your story where your narrator is talking about basically this partner that he has before he transitions, where he says, "My mother adores you. You are the son she always wanted. I will laugh about that in a few years." Looking at how a mother-child relationship evolves after the narrator transitions, there's so much in just that one sentence.
Yeah. On one hand, I think that sentence, for me at least, I try my best to find a lot of humor in my transitioning experience. But in particular with a mother and child's experience, especially in the religious backdrop that the short story is sort of steeped in, I think there are a lot of gendered expectations about it. And I find that especially in a religious context, in a Christian context, there's this expectation of mother-daughter, father-son. And so the rapport between a mother and her daughter is supposedly very different from between that with her son. So in that way, I think as you transition and you're dealing with those issues, the family has to deal with those sort of expectations shifting.
To give listeners a bit more of a taste of this story, could you read an excerpt from your short story, You Streetcar at Night, for us?
Yeah, for sure. There's a certain feeling that can only be experienced when taking the streetcar at night. I'm not sure how to describe it. Relaxing is a little too sleepy. Soothing has a hiss to it, so perhaps that's better. Streetcars have a song at night, after all. It only exists during the night service, when the sky becomes a black blanket outside of the windows and the lamplights and lit storefronts are dreams. Then, when you board a streetcar and take your place, the music begins. There are the bells of the fare box, the rhythm of metal wheels impacting steel rails, the metronome of the wipers. Even the lights hum in a tone that is unique to After Dark. You are cushioned by the music. It rolls under your feet and spreads above you. It fills my lungs. The other passengers feel it too. They rise up and merge together, only keeping their individuality out of sheer politeness. It is a dance of sort, the type that reminds me of home.
Dorian, this is a story that kind of gets into a dichotomy of the life of a trans person before and after transition. Although even saying before and after in relation to transition, I know is something that people sometimes have feelings about. Can you talk about why you wanted to explore, though, this dichotomy of the life of a trans person before coming out and then after coming out and beginning the steps of transition, reflecting back on that earlier time?
Yeah, I think I struggle, like so many other trans people, with the term of like a before and an after transition. I don't know if the transition ever really ends. Mm-hmm. My experience of gender is constantly evolving and feels very fluid for me. So for me, rather than writing about the before and the after, it was more about finding the path and then just still exploring it. And as you keep walking it, your steps become surer and surer, but you never really stop.
Mm. Did the experience of writing this story clarify for you any feelings on your own trans experience? Because it sounds a bit like you're speaking from personal experience, that this is a process that you're navigating still.
Yeah, for sure. It's absolutely a process that I'm navigating. And I think writing this story was, part of the navigation for it. And so writing the story felt a little bit like a prayer almost, a way of just consolidating what I felt and then putting it out in the world and letting it exist and be real.
This is a very interesting time. I say interesting, that feels euphemistic. Difficult and scary, I would say, would be the more perhaps descriptive words. Time to be working as a trans writer and to be expressing these feelings and ideas about transition when the notion of like what it means to be a trans person is something that's being like so contested and is such a polarizing topic for lots of people who are not trans. People have very strong opinions about whether this is like an acceptable way for a person to live their life. And the jury, in their comments about your story, said this story resoundingly illustrates at a time when it could not be more needed that within everyone, outside of all of our external features and presentations, is a prevailing interiority and humanity, and that trans people are not a threat, which I think is a really strong comment in relation to that discourse that we see happening in the media. For you as an author, what do you hope people will take away from this story? And is there anything you're worried about putting this story out in the world at this particular moment?
To be honest, I think the one thing that I hope people take away is that their community does exist and it also will always exist within yourself. And as for what I'm worried about, I don't know if I necessarily have a worry, or I wrote this and then was worried about how it would be received, because I was pretty lucky. I am pretty lucky. I'm an emerging author, very, very emerging. So it feels a lot like just yelling into the void. And there's a certain freedom for that.
Yeah, I suppose there's a freedom in writing if you're not sure who's going to read it. It's almost more like a diaristic kind of writing, perhaps, and you can write to yourself and to your community. I know you've started a Substack recently that's literally called Dear You, and it this feels nosy Parker of me to have like gone and read your Substack or whatever. But I think that there is a real freedom and a sense of prayer, as you mentioned, in a lot of those writings. Who do you write for?
I think I write mostly for myself. Very selfishly, I write so that I can keep trying to make sense of the world, and so that I can keep living in it in a way that makes sense to me. So in part, the you is that I write to in my Substack is a bit of a me, a bit of a just anyone who is listening.
Returning to your story, You, Streetcar at Night, which also is written in this second person format, right? Very similar to what you're talking about with your Substack. There is another trans person besides the narrator who appears in this story, but in a kind of peripheral way. And it's this character, Matthew, who comes out as a teenager. And the narrator kind of never really talks to him or directly engages with him after that point. But you say, I am never brave enough to talk to him, but I think about him so often, it feels like our friendship has revived. Not that he knows, it's all in my head. Why is it that this person who the narrator does not speak to is such a fascination for them, but then the friendship doesn't actually rekindle through that shared experience?
I think for me, it was so mind-blowing for me being young and questioning and meeting, like seeing my first trans person, meeting them even just in the way of like reading about them. Having that interaction was so important to me, even though that person, they do not know I exist. They'll most likely never know. And the reason why I had Matthew as this character that existed, you don't even really see them, you just get a description of them, and it's very vague at best, is because I wanted the narrator to come to a journey of self-acceptance that came entirely from themselves, and to sort of find that self-assurance first. And I think reaching out to someone who has gone through the same experiences as you, especially as a queer person, feels so daunting and so terrifying, especially as you're just beginning your journey. So I think there's a lot of that fear that came into play too.
Why is it that that's such a daunting thing?
I think in part it's because there's like this concept of queerness as like it's once you come out, you're out forever, right? Like you'll always be queer, which I don't necessarily know if I agree with, but I can definitely empathize with the feeling of it's such a big step and, oh God, am I ready for that?
Yeah, there's a sense of exposure, I think, that comes with it. I mean, you're coming out, right? You're emerging from some place of perhaps greater anonymity and making a declaration about who you are to your community. And that is a scary thing. Yeah. And there is this idea of there's like no takebacks, right? You know, if you do kind of shift in your identity, you know, whether that's that you think maybe actually this isn't for me, or as is the case for so many queer and trans people, there's multiple coming outs of coming out perhaps first as queer and then as trans. You have to make these repeated declarations. You can never undo the first one. I think, you know, there is that real sense of fear and exposure. I can certainly relate to that thinking about my own coming out process. I know you're actually working on your first novel. Are you comfortable sharing at all what that's about and what you're looking to work on there?
Yeah, for sure. The elevator pitch, so to speak, is a 20-something-year-old goes looking for their imaginary friend who went missing.
Ooh, okay. Elevator pitch for any agents, publishers listening. Dorian, thank you so much for making the time to chat with us today. It was such a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our time.
That was Dorian McNamara, the winner of the 2025 CBC Short Story Prize. You can read his winning piece, You, Streetcar at Night, at cbcbooks.ca. If you're feeling inspired, I'm happy to say that submissions for the CBC Poetry Prize are currently open until June 1st. The winner will receive $6,000 and a 2-week writing residency at the Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity. You can head to cbcbooks.ca for all the details on how to enter. This episode was produced by Daphne Santos Vieira with help from Barb Carey. Ailey Yamamoto is our associate producer. Our senior producer is Jacqueline Kirk, and Aaron Balser is our executive producer. Big thank you to our audio techs, Aronde Williams and Marco Luciano, and to the entire CBC Books team. They are sensational. They bring you all of the goods on our website and socials. I'm Mattea Roach, and this is Bookends. You can tune in on Sundays and Wednesdays on CBC Radio or follow Bookends on the podcast app of your choice. And don't forget to leave us a review. It really does help get the word out. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Because when the book ends, the conversation begins.